Gay marriage, no, we can't do that. The next thing that you know, they'll want to be treated like human beings. If you want to talk about something that will get conservatives riled up and ready to fight on a moment's notice, that's gay rights. And there's no better part of gay rights than gay marriage. There are so many hysterical conservatives that kept harping and crying about this, and they had all the justifications in the world for why we should not have passed gay marriage in 2015. But we did. And for them, it's just been a hard rainbow to swallow, as there is an absolute firestorm of anti-trans bills right now being pushed through all sorts of legislation from Texas to Tennessee to Arkansas. Without doubt, the argument about gay marriage will come up once again, attacked from both conservatives and from just the religious right. So, periodically on Twitter, I see this argument crop up sometimes. Every now and then on conservative shows or YouTubers, they will mention, especially if they are of the religious right, gay marriage and why it should not be recognized or whatever else, even though it's been that way for 6 years now. So, I hate bad arguments as much as anyone else. Let's go ahead and put the nails in the coffin of this argument. So I'm going to arm you so that if you're an LGBT person or just an ally and you are tired of hearing this dog shit coming from conservatives, I will arm you and equip you with everything that you need to rip them apart on this one. And they will rue the day that they brought this up. So first I'll say, well, you have to define marriage. So marriage is defined as an institution in which interpersonal relationships are acknowledged or sanctioned by the government. Many people would also include sexual relations in their definition, but this is not a requirement, because you could have a platonic marriage for whatever reason. You could have, like, I don't know, an asexual couple. You could have marriage of convenience where someone is married for more like a business arrangement. You might have like an elderly couple who like don't really have a desire for like the more carnal parts of their lives, but they want to enjoy their golden years together because they've like lost a spouse and they've moved on, but at the same time they don't want to like live together as like boyfriend and girlfriend when they're up in age, because of the type of conservative society that we've had traditionally that would look down on something like that. So they end up rushing to get married just so they can spend their time together. There are tons of reasons of why somebody might get married besides just sex. That shouldn't be the only motivation for it, right? And ironically, if the religious zealots had their way, then you would have been married before you had sex, right? That's against, like, Christians say all the time that you should not have sex before marriage. So that would mean that if you are marrying that person, then it's not based on sex. Yet, the religious right says all the time that our society is just so sex obsessed, and that's the only reason why people get married. Because they're going to try to slip right in and say that, well, it's all about the kids. And let's talk about that for one fucking second. The purpose of marriage is actually to bind individuals, their property, and other rights that accompany that, such as medical authority or inheritances, if you own a business together, and a variety of other things. Children are not the sole purpose of marriage. There are plenty of married couples, gay or straight, that don't have kids, that don't want kids, and take preventative measures using contraceptives to make sure they sure don't have any. And there are now, on the opposite side, there are plenty of married couples that would like to have kids that could also be straight as well or gay, and they're not able to reproduce for whatever reason. And guess what? There are plenty of kids that need to be adopted. And it seems absolutely absurd to me that you could try to make a moral argument that children ought to be sitting in orphanages rather than have a good loving home with two parents just because they're LGBT. Fuck that. But even when we're talking about couples that don't want to have kids, they might still want to be married. But we know how long the Catholic Church has fought against the use of contraceptive and condoms, even as going so far as to have their missionaries in Africa telling the peoples of African nations that using condoms was worse, in God's opinion, than getting AIDS. If that gives you an idea of the warped sense that a lot of these conservatives have, they would rather you risk getting a deadly disease than using a condom. That's how baby obsessed these religious people are. Now, as embarrassingly stupid as it is, I have heard some conservatives say something like, well, if you allow gay marriage, then the next thing you know, that they'll just allow polygamy and you can just marry however many people you want to marry. Well, I mean, what's wrong with that? The real answer to this is that is polygamy is a whole nother conversation, and it has nothing to do with two LGBT people, whether it's two men, two women, what have you, that want to get married just like any other heterosexual couple. Not only is bringing up polygamy a pivot and moving the goalposts once again, they're doing it so that they can try to make LGBT people sound more outrageous than anything that we're actually asking. Because I'm like, oh, wait, you want one man, like a man and a man to be able to get married? No, what you really mean is 20 men all want to get married together. Don't let them pivot that and don't let them move that goalpost. If they try to bring up polygamy, point out to them that you could have a polygamous or polycule and it could somehow work out to be like all heterosexual couples, like only heterosexual couplings, and guess what? They'd still be polygamous. Guess what's in their Bible? You end up having, kings that had thousands of wives. That's polygamous. The Mormon church forever and a day had polygamy of heterosexual relationships. So don't allow them to demonize polygamy as if there's something morally wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with polygamy. And I will be goddamned before I sit here and listen to some fucking religious people whose religion has historically been loaded with polygamy turn around and say that even if some LGBT people wanted to live in like a polycule, that there's anything wrong with that when there's not. LGBT couples have only ever wanted equality with heterosexual couples. It was nothing ever more than that. Now let's talk about some really absurd and unfortunately some really dark arguments. And some of this is like, I mean, I don't know why your mind would just immediately go to these questions, but these are really the next things that they'll ask when they're trying to assault gay marriage. They'll say, well, what if somebody wants to marry a child? Well, it's funny that they would bring this up because my answer is that you should not be able to marry anyone that is younger than the age of reason and cannot give informed, enthusiastic consent and understand the ramifications of entering into a legally binding contract such as marriage for the rest of their lives. You know what group does not petition for child brides? The LGBT community. Do you know what group opposes legislation every time we try to pass laws outlawing child brides? Conservatives. That's right. Conservative religious people in some fundamentalist conservative groups in this country right now, in the year 2021, they are still using arranged marriages to marry off 13-year-old girls to 30, 40-plus-year-old men. It's happening right now. We actually have a huge problem with child brides in this country and worldwide, and almost all of it is defended by religiously conservative groups. I wonder why. Yet, if we try to oppose it and we try to ban that sort of practice, we're told that we're the immoral ones, that we are disgusting for being LGBT. Well, look at what they're doing. It is a fucking absurdity. Do not let them get away with that. Then, of course, they'll ask something like, what if someone wants to marry their animal? I hate that I have to say this. Animals have less than human intelligence and therefore cannot consent to any legal contract, marriage, or otherwise. This has got to be like the very definition of a slippery slope argument. It's like, oh, two informed, enthusiastic, legally consenting adults want to get married. They love each other and they want to consolidate their affection and they want to merge their families together. They want to build a life together. And a conservative is going to look at that and just go like, yeah, but what if you want to marry some dog? What? Like, this is like scraping the bottom of the barrel, but I mean, this is like inevitably where their arguments go because they have nothing to offer. And let's say something like, marriage is strictly a religious institution, and it has always been one woman and one man. Now, we already know from the Bible and their polygamy and all kinds of, they want to brush that under the rug and just retcon it and pretend it didn't happen. Like, well, Jesus came along and fixed all of that. And it's like, well, first of all, you can't demonstrate that, Jesus ever even fucking existed. But beyond that, let's just take that and set that aside for a second. And I'm just going to stay focused on this. So they'll say that marriage is strictly a religious institution. No matter how many religious people tell you this, they don't own marriage. In America, the state issues you a marriage license, not the church. And if you go and you get married and you do your whole little religious ceremony, but you never got that state license, your marriage is not valid. You can also go to the courthouse and get married by a judge that's there with no priest, no religious organization ever having been involved. My own marriage was conducted at a courthouse with a judge. There was not a fucking priest within 100 yards of me. At least I didn't think I saw any perverts. Sorry, I know that's a little bit of a low blow, but I couldn't resist it. But laying claim that marriage is strictly a religious institution is just as absurd if they try to argue that funerals were only a religious service and somebody couldn't actually really be dead unless a priest actually, was there to present their final rites. Everyone understands why that would be garbage, yet for some reason we are expected to tolerate it whenever a church lays claim that marriage is a Christian institution. Well, if that's the case, then I would like to see some Christians trying to claim that funerals are only a Christian thing. Otherwise, they should shut the fuck up and stay out of our private lives. Marriage is a legal contract, and I refuse to accept the idea that the church, its religious leaders, or clergy of a faith that I'm not part of has a right to govern interpersonal contracts between private citizens. If you are conservative and you feel like the government should only enforce contracts between two legally consenting adults, then hopefully you would see why allowing another institution, the church, the right to just step in when it has no courts, no accountability, and no regulations gets to dictate your interpersonal contracts with other people just by fiat because they said so. The church and its adherents do not have a single argument that invalidates gay marriage without simultaneously invalidating heterosexual marriage. And if their God has a problem with it, tell them to show up to court. Otherwise, they should shut the fuck up. That one got a little hot. I'm not gonna lie. I get a little burned up whenever I start thinking about like gay rights and how long it took us to get gay marriage. Like, I felt that was going to happen when I was like a kid, and I'm in my 30s, and it's only happened within the last like 6 years or so. On top of that, when I married my wife, I had not come out as trans yet, and now that I've come out as trans, there's the argument once again that like, what if they recognize like my gender? Now they're going to say that I'm in a gay marriage, so I should be divorced. But wait a minute, if they don't accept that I am a woman, then I can't be in a gay marriage, right? Because they would think that like I'm not a woman married to another woman, but they're going to pass other laws to target what? Like the arguments against the LGBT community, none of them make any sense. And none of the stuff that conservatives have ever come up with against gay marriage has ever made any sense, and it is something that I do get very passionate about. And if you agree with me and you agree with some of my arguments, please go ahead and click that like button. It would help me so much. And subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. If you disagreed with me, go ahead and leave a comment and tell me why. Maybe we can have an argument there. Or you can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm always available to drive another awful argument against my community right into the goddamn ground. I will see you in the next video.
Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face, tell me that you love me, even if it's fake.